Welcome to NAB 2018 in the Grass Valley booth in the South Hall, SL 106. You can't miss us. Walk in the door, we're right there. We're going to be talking with Trevor Francis. He is the Business Development Manager for Grass Valley. Business Development Manager. So, what's your experience with broadcast and broadcast news?
So my experience with broadcast news goes back about 35 years when I started working as a tape editor for a commercial news provider in the UK, network news. And as part of that, I used to travel all around the world covering news stories. So some were exciting things like great inventions, some were boring things like government conferences. I've done some wars, I've done some natural disasters, I've done a bit of everything.
So you know the pain of being an actual working person within the industry.
Very much so.
So throughout your history to where we are now, how has the model for news production and delivery and consumption changed?
Well, that's interesting, and there's something which touches on my past in there, which is in 1990, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, where I actually was there the night that it happened as a news producer and editor. The following year, in the Czech, what was now called the Czech Republic, then called Czechoslovakia, had their very first elections since the Second World War. And I was there covering the story with our foreign correspondent, and the chief editor-in-chief of our station was there as a foreign advisor. This is relevant, believe me, stick with me on this. And halfway through the evening of the election, myself and the correspondent, we went off to get a coffee. And I came back to find Václav Havel, who went on to become the president of Czechoslovakia that night, with my boss. And my boss was trying to show him the story that we've been editing on my tape machines. And he was flicking switches and pressing buttons and couldn't make anything happen. And I could see his face turning purple with rage. And he saw me approaching and he sort of said, "Trevor, please show Mr. Havel your story." So I leaned over, flicked two switches, pressed a button, turned up the speaker, and out came the sound. And that was all fine. And then the following morning, he just looked at me and he said, "You are never going to embarrass me like that again. I want a production system that anyone can use without a lot of detailed engineering and technical training." And if you like, fast forward from that about 10 years, nine or 10 years, and I was helping to launch the first large-scale digital production news system in the world, which was at ITN in London. And then from that, I ended up becoming, if you like, an evangelist for that kind of production, and I joined the company then known as Quantel, which has then taken me on the pathway to now becoming part of Grass Valley.
And that's a shame because back in those days, because I was an editor as well, all those buttons and knobs and jog and shuttle wheels and T-bars and,
exactly.
and even with vision mixers, it was job security because it looked so complicated that no one could use it.
Yes, it was. And there were a million traps for the unwary, which my boss fell into. So you ask, what is it with business development now? And business development is very much about that, continuing the evangelizing process. And of course, we've moved on from the very idea of producing with digital systems and overcoming the original problems of tape machines, which is you could only replay it once you've finished recording it, and if I've got a tape, you can't have it at the same time. We've moved way on from there now to large shared storage systems and people talking about MAMs and PAMs and databases and all this kind of thing. But my role is really always backing people out of the engineering and thinking about what are the actual problems they're trying to solve, and then imagining our products and services into solving their problems. And then I call on the expertise of the product managers and the engineers then to actually figure out exactly how all the pieces will slot together. But I help focus them into the bigger picture.
And that's great. I mean, as a former editor myself, getting people away from the technology, because I had always said, anyone can be trained to be a technical editor.
Yeah.
But only an artist can be an editor.
Precisely.
So to further remove them from the technical hurdles so they can concentrate on the artistry, because cutting news is an art. Whether you have time for news magazine, whether you're crash editing a special or something that's coming in, it's an art, and you don't want the technology to get in the way.
Precisely.
So today, what do you see as the most critical issue for newscasters?
Well, first of all, of course, it's the move away from television. You know, a lot of the grammar that you see and read and hear, even today around a show like NAB, people are talking about meeting the deadlines of going to air. But that's very much a 20th century way of thinking about things, where the newscast started at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the evening, or even with 24-hour news, they'll be thinking about the next top of the hour or the halfway point in the hour. But of course, to use a little bit of a cliche, with the internet, the deadline is always now. And that's really the issue, is actually making it as easy and as fast to put content in the public space now. And of course, that public space, the first resort for seeing and hearing news today is not, generally speaking, the television screen. It's going to be my cell phone, almost certainly, or maybe my tablet or my laptop.
So we've moved away from the half-hour clock or the 1 hour clock to basically a clock with no hands.
Exactly, exactly.
So, business development manager here at Grass Valley, how are we helping to solve these issues?
We're helping because the issue facing what we used to call the broadcasters, anyone creating news content, first of all is really, like with most industries and most businesses, comes all the way back to money and costs. News is an incredibly costly thing to do because, like myself in the past, it involved a great deal of traveling. In those days, it involved hauling a lot of equipment around the world. Well, we've now scaled that down to laptops and tablets, but it's about actually recovering cost by selling the content to you, the consumer. And the value that a credible organization has, whether it's like the BBC or Sky News in my country, or CNN or Fox or Al Jazeera, whoever is your favorite trusted provider, what they're giving you is the credibility that you know. We may disagree with some of those individual organizations' stance in how they present news, and you know, the dreadful term fake news, which has been kicking around, but if I watch the BBC or if I watch CNN or Sky, I know how they work and I trust what they tell me, and the value that they're adding is they're not just showing me things which I could see on Twitter or Facebook or Snapchat or whatever. They're telling me that these pictures are real, and they're telling me that this thing really happened, it isn't fake, and they're telling me why it happened, what will be the consequences in the future, and so on and so on. And the technology that we're providing and the systems that we're providing means that the content creators and the storytellers can draw on all of the resources in the industry, which means the text, the audio, the video, stills, and the archive, you know, the backlog of information, which actually gives today's stories context and meaning. They can bring all of that together into a composited story, but actually put it in the place where it's required as quickly as possible in a way that I want to see it. So for example, if I want to watch 60 Minutes, I want to spend a whole hour being explained British foreign policy post-Brexit, but equally, if my team's just scored a goal in soccer, I want to see it as soon as the balls hit the back of the net, maybe on my cell phone.
So while doing television news is hard, we're hoping to make it easier.
Exactly. And that's the point. Going right back to my story in Prague, that, you know, with those ancient tape machines, you needed to be a trained engineer just to make the darn thing come on and work. What we've done is we've abstracted all of that complication away so that people can just go back to doing what they originally wanted to do, which was to tell stories.
Excellent. So if there's one thing you want people to take away from this NAB and Grass Valley and what we're showing here, what would that one thing be?
Well, I'm going to perhaps be a little bit dishonest and try and sneak in two.
I'll give you two.
Okay, so because of the bringing together of two great companies as far as in my area of the business, which is Sam and Grass Valley, we have two customer bases who've started journeys together. And what we're showing them is that they can continue the journeys that they were on, so they're safe and secure in the way that they wanted to work. But in the future, and the future's not very far away, and we're showing a lot of evidence of it here this week, there's if you like, a great future where two great technologies come together and the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, as we used to say. And as an evidence of that, which we're showing here, and I think is the one thing I show our customer base that really, really turns them on, is take some video of them, perhaps even while we're having a conversation like this, a little bit sneakily perhaps, on my cell phone, pressing a couple of buttons on our web app, upload it into our storage system here, and then, without them even realizing it, start editing it on my tablet and then post it onto Twitter.
Excellent.
And that is news from lens to glass as quickly as possible with, you know, totally commodity products in my pocket.
Because the goal is to actually just get that news to the viewer as quickly and as accurately as possible.
That's right, and in the place where they want to see it, which may be the cell phone if they're sitting on the bus, the laptop if they're in the office, or maybe if it's the TV in the living room if they're at home with their family.
Absolutely. Trevor, thank you very much, and thanks very much for joining us from the Grass Valley booth here at NAB 2018.